Hello and welcome. I am Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Israel says 300 aid trucks entered Gaza since the blockade eased, but aid groups warn supplies are stalled at the border. As airstrikes intensify, Hamas says 6 aid guards were killed, highlighting chaos blocking relief to those that most need it. Gaza's civil defense says 16 people were killed on Friday in fresh Israeli airstrikes as the military offensive intensifies. The deaths occurred across multiple areas since midnight, according to officials on the ground. Harvard files a federal lawsuit against the Trump administration for blocking its foreign student program, calling it a retaliation for defending academic freedom. The suit says the move violates Harvard's First Amendment rights and seeks to halt the ban immediately. Iranian and US negotiators launched a 5th round of Oman-mediated nuclear talks in Rome today, Iranian media reported. The indirect talks are led by Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and US envoy Steve Witkoff. Moscow has said that 270 prisoners of war and 120 civilians were freed on each side in what's expected to be the war's largest exchange since it began. Ukrainian officials confirm the swap is underway, with more releases expected in the coming days. President Trump escalates his trade agenda, calling for a 50% tariff on all EU imports starting on June the 1st. Blaming stalled talks. He also threatens Apple with a 25% tariff unless it moves iPhone production to the United States, warning on Truth Social that both Europe and big tech must pay up. European stocks tumbled today as Trump threatened a 50% tariff on EU imports set to begin on the 1st of June. The Paris CAC 40 fell 2.8% and Germany's DAX dropped 2.5% amid fears of sharp escalation in transatlantic trade tensions. As Lebanon heads to local polls, Hezbollah pushes to prove its political strength despite heavy losses in last year's war with Israel. With reconstruction aid tied to its disarmament, the group says any talks on giving up arms depend on an Israeli exit from South Lebanon. Our top story today, humanitarian aid is slowly trickling into Gaza. More than 90 trucks carrying vital supplies like flour and baby supplements have entered southern Gaza. However, the United Nations warns the aid is insufficient to prevent a worsening catastrophe. A German government spokesperson, Sebastian Hill, criticised the small scale of aid entering Gaza, calling it too little, too late and too slow. He urged for a significant release to end the suffering. France also reaffirms its support for Israel's right to defend itself, but condemns the situation in Gaza. Spokeswoman Sophie Primas calls for a ceasefire and urgent humanitarian aid. She stresses France's long-standing position for a two-state solution to ensure lasting peace in the region. Meanwhile, according to Hamas officials, there have been strikes in Israel that have killed at least 6 Palestinian guarding aid trucks in Gaza. The strike targeted those preventing looting at the Kerem Shalom crossing. At the same time, overnight Israeli airstrikes has killed 16 people, with Khan Yunis, Deir al-Balah and Jabalia among the hardest hit areas. In another development, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has appointed Major General David Zini as the new head of Shin Bet, despite a ruling from the Israeli Supreme Court declaring the dismissal of the previous chief unlawful. This move has sparked controversy, with opposition leader Yair Lapid urging Zini to reject the position until the legal issues are resolved. We're now joined by 2 guests. First being Ali M. Bushback, who is an independent Palestinian researcher located in Cairo, and we're also joined by Peter Baum, who is the foreign editor of the Weekly Blitz. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us on the programme. Ali, I wanted to come to you first. This ongoing blockade that has been in place that has recently been eased, but was previously in place for around 12 weeks. There we've seen a trickling of aid coming in to Gaza now. Are these trucks that Israel that is letting in, is this sufficient? What is the minimum daily volume genuinely needed to ease this crisis? Apologies.
Thank you, Thomas. The situation in Gaza is still totally dire in Gaza. Especially, they are suffering from the risk of famine in northern Gaza. Even in southern part of Gaza, people are also suffering from the starvation. Today, also, or the night of yesterday, Israel asked the people to displace from northern part of Gaza, and there is a huge movement to displace from Jabalia refugee camp and also Tal Zatar and Bet Hanun and Bet Lahias. There is a mass of the people though forced to leave their home and their places to looking for a safe place. About the humanitarian aid which Israel allowed to the truck into Gaza, things it's not sufficient, first of all, and second, you are talking about 2 million people. They are starving and they are with a less and lack of food. So Israel also, allowing for, I guess, 9 or 10 of the trucks.
Ali, I do apologise. I have to let Peter respond. We've only got a limited amount of time. Aid groups, Peter, say Israel is only letting aid trickle through the Shalom Karim corridor. What are your thoughts on how this easing of the blockade is working? Is this aid sufficient for the reported famine that is being suffered by the Palestinian people currently in Gaza?
Ever since October the 7th, no more than 3 days after October the 7th, Western media and the Palestinian narrative was as follows: insufficient food, insufficient water, hospitals can't function, dire conditions for Palestinians. What you've got to do is look at the Al Jazeera reports from the area, and every time there's an Al Jazeera report, behind that Al Jazeera report, there's people running around, there's fuel depots, cars going backwards and forwards. The idea of a famine, starvation in Gaza is an absolute absurdity. It's a lie. It's a myth.
Okay, Peter. I do want to move on. I want to go on to the international condemnation, which is obviously become rife in the past couple of days, particularly from Europe. We're talking about the UK. We're talking about France, and we're also talking about Canada as well. France has reaffirmed its support for Israel's right to defend itself, but and also condemns Hamas as an organisation. What are your thoughts on that? Benjamin Netanyahu has said that he claims that the UK and France and Canada are supporting Hamas in their statements. What are your thoughts?
The United Nations has a rabid obsession with demonising Israel. The only reason that the European nations have come out more strongly in this last week condemning Israel is simply because the governments recognise that they can't take the domestic opposition and protests and marches that are happening on their capital cities and in other cities in their areas week after week after week. It's an absurdity to believe that the Netanyahu will do anything other than achieve his objective, which is to destroy Hamas militarily, and he will put, as long as he's in power, he will put up with all the...
Okay. Thank you, Peter. I've got to move to Ali next. I want to stay on the international condemnation of the recent of Israel's actions. Ali, do you welcome these statements from these three major Western powers, or was it too late in your opinion?
The thing is, better late rather than nothing. So I guess the condemnation, everyone will welcome it, and I guess this is a glow of hope for the Palestinian, because the international community that it runs and that changed the mental of the international community after supporting Israel in the genocide in Gaza and permit them to kill casualties from the civilians. Totally, we are talking about 50,000, and we are crossing the number of 50,000, most of them children and women. And your guest, and he said that Al Jazeera reporting lie things about the starvation and famine in Gaza, but on the ground, and I'm in touch with the people on the ground, there is a several of people, they are really without food, and we have witnessed a lot of mobile phone footage that describing many people, they are since past 2 days without any part of food or any kind of food. So the thing is a really situation dire in Gaza. Everyone in Gaza now in hope, and there is a glow of hope after the international community change and the international community condemn Israel starvation and using food as a weapon in Gaza. And there is a several of government and diplomatic consider it as a war crime to use a food as a weapon in Gaza.
Okay, Peter, I just want to give you 10 seconds to respond to that before we move on.
It's interesting. Genocide. The Palestinian population has multiplied by a factor of 11 since 1948 and gone up by 75,000 since October the 7th. The use of the term genocide is a false narrative and is absolutely stupid for anyone of any intellect to use.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter Baum and Ali Emma Bushback, for joining us on the programme. We really appreciate your insight. We now move over to the United States, where the Trump administration has revoked Harvard's ability to enroll international students and demanded that current foreign students should be transferred, or Harvard risks losing its legal status. Officials have warned the crackdown might extend to other challenges as well. Harvard condemned the move as unlawful and reaffirmed its commitment to educating international students. The university said this action harms its community and undermines its academic and research mission. Congressional Democrats criticized the decision, calling it an attack on academic freedom and Harvard's independence. Representative Jamie Raskin labeled the move retaliation for Harvard's opposition to Trump's policies. Beijing has also condemned the US move, calling it political. China's foreign ministry said the action damages US global credibility. Spokeswoman Mao Ning urged Washington to keep education free from politics. Let's listen in to the Chinese foreign ministry spokeswoman.
中美教育合作是互利的，中方一贯反对将教育合作政治化。美方有关做法只会损害美国的形象和国际信誉。
This comes as the Trump administration has revoked Harvard University's right to enroll foreign students, affecting over a quarter of its annual intake and escalating tensions with the prestigious Ivy League institution. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem announced the immediate withdrawal of Harvard's Student and Exchange Visitor Program certification, the system permitting international students to study in the United States. This move follows Harvard's refusal to comply with government demands for oversight on admissions and hiring. Amid President Trump's accusations that the university fosters anti-Semitism, supports pro-Hamas views, and promotes divisive woke policies. Trump had previously warned of such action if Harvard resisted government supervision. Harvard enrolled more than 27% of foreign students in 2024 to 2025 academic year. Noem stated that maintaining foreign student enrollment is a privilege contingent on compliance with Department of Homeland Security regulations. Harvard is yet to respond to requests for comment. We're now joined by Raymond Vickery to discuss this further. Raymond, thank you very much for joining us, a former US Assistant Secretary of Commerce based in Washington, DC. Thank you very much for joining us. The Chinese Foreign Secretary just has most recently come out and said that education should stay away from politics. Why doesn't the Trump administration view this? Why doesn't the Trump administration agree with this statement?
Well, thanks very much for having me, Thomas. You know, great democracies like India and the U.S. need to cooperate on trying to build peace and prosperity throughout the world, but this has to be done within the framework of a rule of law, respect for democratic values, which are enshrined both in the U.S. and the India Constitution. The right to freedom of speech, the right to due process, equal protection of the laws. What has happened here with Harvard in the latest move is a move by the Trump administration in violation of the United States Constitution, in violation of the legal precepts which are there. There is a procedure for denying a university the rights to enroll foreign students, but none of that has been followed. So it's plainly illegal. I don't think that you solve the problem by saying universities have nothing to do with politics. Universities are for the discussion, the promotion of critical thought, and that critical thought has to include what happens in the United States in regard to diversity, inclusion, and equity, which the Trump administration is trying to destroy. It has to do with the discussion of what happens in Gaza, as you have just reported. All of these things ought to be a part of university education. So what really needs to be done is to get back to the basics of the U.S. Constitution. Of course, India is very much affected by this, since it has the second largest population of foreign students in American universities, and many leading members of the government and society in India send their children to Harvard and other universities in the United States. So this has a direct immediate impact. I would note that in California already, a judge has ruled that the Trump administration to exclude a number of foreign students has already been enjoined. There is a lawsuit which has been filed yesterday by Harvard on this, and I have every reason to believe that it will be successful. But the real question is, will the Trump administration obey the rule of law? Will the Supreme Court, which has a majority really of Trump supporters on it, support the rule of law? In the longer run, we've got elections next year, both in the House and a part of the Senate, and this is going to be a major issue. So what needs to be done is not, say, depoliticize, as Chinese have said, but to provide for the basic rights to discuss, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, rule of law, due process, all of which are very common to the U.S. and to India and other great democracies.
Raymond, I do apologize. I'd quite like to just interject just for 1 second. Going to protests and free speech, the First Amendment, as you speak about, that's often something associated with going to university. It's been going on for years and years and years. What makes this case particularly different? Trump has obviously cited anti-Semitism and also association with the Chinese Communist Party. What makes this different from years and years of student protests that have happened in the past? That have obviously frequently challenged government policy?
Well, what makes it different is President Trump and his supporters who don't believe in that kind of expression and have taken it upon themselves to try to impose an authoritarian approach which does away with those things which, as you rightly point out, have been a part of university life since time immemorial. And what's going on in the United States is an attempt to impose an authoritarian form of government which is contrary to the United States Constitution. So the question is, are the courts going to stand up? And then will there be willingness in the administrative bodies to follow the courts? And if not, what will happen in elections? So we're at a very grim crossroads. And what's happening in regard to Harvard is a symptom of the overall malady which is affecting this country. And it's time for people in India, in the US, Japan, Western Europe, other great democracies to stand up and say, no, this is not right. We can have discussion and disagreement. We can try to tamp down and anti-Semitism, but you don't do it by doing away with the basic freedoms that this country has had for about 250 years, and which India follows, tries to follow assiduously. And so that's what's going on over here, and it is a very, very grave situation.
Raymond Vickery, thank you very much for your insight. We now move on. US President Donald Trump has threatened Apple with a 25% tariff if the iPhones, if the company sells in the United States are not manufactured locally. In a post on Truth Social, Trump said he had a long ago informed Tim Cook of Apple that he expects iPhones will be sold in the United States of America, and they will be manufactured and built in the United States, not in India or anywhere else. Although completed smartphones are exempt from Trump's tariffs, for now, not all components that go into Apple devices are shared. Apple expects US tariffs to cost $900 million in the current quarter, even though their impact was limited at the start of this year, according to Tim Cook. Meanwhile, after Trump's Apple threat, the market has taken a hit. The Apple market has slumped. The Dow Jones is down by 0.9%. The S&P 500 is at 1.18%, and the Nasdaq is now at 1.53%. Recently, Trump's sweeping tariffs on major US trading partners have roiled global markets and upended international commerce. We're now joined by Ajay Jua, former Commerce Secretary and Senior Economist located here in India. Thank you very much, Ajay, for joining us on the program. India had hopes to manufacture iPhones here in the subcontinent. What does this plan by Donald Trump scrap all those plans, do you think?
Thank you very much for having me on the show. I don't think the plan to manufacture smartphones in India, iPhones, particularly the ones by Apple, is huge. You must realize that the Apple has certainly started selling more phones in India ever since it set up its factories or its contract manufacturers, 3 of them, set up those factories in southern India, which has the comparative advantage to manufacture precision instruments. What was on the anvil? Now the question is whether that would get derailed or disrupted should be the question. That is, when Mr. Tim Cook openly said that he's going to expand the capacity in India from the current 10% of the total production of Apple around the world to almost 20%, and he gave a figure, he gave a terminal year as also the number of phones he would like to manufacture here, and that the base from India or the iPhones manufactured from India will be exported to to meet the United States local demand. Today, those phones are coming from Vietnam. Both those are on the radar of President Trump, and he had imposed higher duties on imports from there than from India, which was 26%, compared to 45% in one country, that's Vietnam, and 120 odd percent in China. So Mr. Trump or Mr. Cook had taken a decision based on ground realities that the duties on India or exports from India would be attracting lesser customs duties in the United States than elsewhere. So what has President Trump said today, after he probably had two meetings with Mr. Tim Cook, one right at the beginning of his recent tour to the Middle East, and second, I understand, on Tuesday, he met with him in the White House.
Yeah.
I think what has happened is Mr. Cook has urged him that he should continue, he should allow him to expand in India, and that there are comparative advantages, sorry for using the term second time, compared to doing it in the United States. A similar phone as the one which was produced in India for say $1,000 would cost Mr. Cook to 3,500 rupees to produce it in the US, where the manufacturing culture over the years, particularly precision manufacturing, has gradually dwindled away, gone elsewhere in the world. China was the biggest beneficiary. So the customer in the US is still better off if 25% duty is levied on a $1,000 phone coming from India, rather than his having to pay $3,500 on the local, the US-made phone. So that's number one observation I have. A second one is the supply chain for the phones. There are thousands of components, small components which go into the iPhones. The supply
Dr.
chain.
Ajay, I'm really sorry. I've just got some more information. We are staying with you. US President Donald Trump has threatened to impose a 50% tariff on imports from the European Union. He is accused the 27-member trading bloc of stalling trade talks. He is lamenting that negotiations with the EU are going nowhere. His Truth Social post read that he is recommending a straight 50% tariff on the European Union starting on June the 1st of 2025. Following this, European stock markets tumbled. The Paris CAC 40 index of blue chip stocks was down at 2.8% at around 12:08 hours GMT, while the Frankfurt DAX also fell 2.5%. If the new duties come into effect, they would dramatically hike the current US baseline 10% levy against goods coming from the EU. It would also ratchet up the economic tensions between the world's biggest economy and its largest trading bloc. The talks between the United States and the EU have not gone smoothly with other partners. The EU recently threatened to hit US goods with nearly 100 billion euros with tariffs if the ongoing talks fail to lower levies on European goods. Dr. Ajay Jua, I want to come back to you. Apologies for the interruption. We can see these stock markets falling whenever Donald Trump makes an announcement. We can go back to Apple on this. We can go back to US domestic stocks on this, and we can go into the European stock market on this. It seems that one man has control over the stock market as it goes, and is making tremendous losses for a lot of companies and a lot of investors. What are your thoughts?
I would say that it's I don't want to comment on political aspects of this kind of arrangement, but in the United States, the government runs in the name of the president, and the president is probably more powerful than in several other democracies, or most other democracies of the world, where the process is more participative, and all kinds of powers in the United States do get vested in the president in the name of national security, or whatever other causes could be. So President Trump's statements do have a major effect on the stock market, because that's the day's development or the week's development. And this is not to say that the real strength of the United States actually decides the value of the dollar, decides the stock market prices in the long run, and in that, several other institutions, if not individuals, do have a role. And the Fed is a very important body whose decisions do affect the liquidity in the market, they affect the interest rates, and consequently the process of price levels, as well as the overall economy, whether it is in a recession mode or it's buoyant. So those kind of things are there. There are checks and balances, but certainly I would concede that in the United States, the President of the United States does exercise powers which probably are not there in most other democracies of the world. I don't know about how it happens in the planned economies, or you call them the communist countries, but this is the situation. And I was just going to complete one aspect on the Apple phone, if you would allow me, that supply chain arrangements which Apple has put in place in China are for over the years. What it has arranged in Vietnam, a little shorter probably than in China, but certainly components were coming even earlier. Now from components has gone on to assembly. And in India, it has farmed out the manufacturing to people who are doing the work for Apple elsewhere in the world, particularly Foxconn. So Foxconn is making had made investments in India with component makers, as well as now gone into arrangements with on the assembly side.
Dr. Ajay Jua, thank you very, very much for joining us on the program. Apologies for the interruption. We have to move on. We stay in India, where the External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar said India has zero tolerance for terrorism and will never give in to nuclear blackmail. At a joint press conference in Berlin, Jaishankar said India will handle Pakistan bilaterally. There should be no confusion, he told German Foreign Minister Johann Wadeful. India is reaching out globally after the Pahalgam terror attack killed 26 civilians last month. Jaishankar welcomed Germany's support for India's right to self-defense. Wadeful condemned the attack and backed India's position and urged a bilateral India-Pakistan resolution. Jaishankar reaffirmed that this marks a new normal in India's security doctrine. Meanwhile, here is how the German foreign minister addressed the state of terror in India.
All were appalled by the brutal terrorist attack on India on the 22nd of April. We condemned this attack on civilians in the strongest terms. Our deepest sympathy goes out to all victims and their families. After military attacks on both sides, and India, of course, has every right to defend itself against terrorism, the fact that now a truce is in place is something we appreciate very much. What is important now is that this truce remains stable, that dialogue can happen in order to find bilateral solutions for that.
Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you.